James Bond 007 for the Game Boy is an anomaly for both the Game Boy and the James Bond franchise, combining disparate influences into a game that, while not even close to a unique experience, still offers some interesting and possibly subversive takes on the character and the movie franchise. This is Chris from Makopowered, and hey look, I'm actually narrating a video again! I mean, welcome to Weekend Rental, where we look at games that, while not classics, or sometimes even good, are still worth examining and maybe even playing despite themselves. Before we dive in, a quick note. The timing for the Resident Evil Survivor video was a little off. That should have been saved for October to coincide with Halloween. So, why is the December video about James Bond? Because in the 90s, back before they endlessly repeated A Christmas Story, TBS would have annual holiday James Bond marathons. Dubbed 13 Days of 007, there was something of a holiday tradition for me, and so, James Bond on the Game Boy for the holidays. Okay, now that that's out of the way, if you were a gamer in the 90s, when you think of James Bond, you probably think of this. Or, more likely, this. Or, if you were a PlayStation gamer, you might have been stuck with this. Chances are you would not think of a cartoonish, black and white Game Boy game which bears more than a passing resemblance to Link's Awakening. And yet, that is exactly what 1998's James Bond for the Game Boy offered players. The game's pedigree may have something to do with this resemblance. The game was developed by Sapphire, a Utah-based developer who seems to be largely responsible for middling to low-quality licensed fare, like Xena Talisman of Fate for the Nintendo 64, Van Helsing for the PlayStation 2, and Peter Pan for the Game Boy Advance. Sorry, Peter Pan the Motion Picture Event for the Game Boy Advance. Oh, they also happen to have made StarCraft Brood War. That's right, they're responsible for one of the most successful video game expansions of all time. That expertise with overhead gameplay mechanics, combined with the fact that James Bond was published by Nintendo themselves, makes the Link's Awakening similarities make much more sense. These similarities aren't even subtle either. Early in the game, Bond gets a machete that is pretty much a direct analog to Link's sword. The rank-and-file enemies largely act like the moblins found throughout Koholint Island. The inventory system is almost identical. There's a section of the game dedicated to trading items with various characters. There are labyrinthine mazes to navigate, some with large doors to unlock. With so many similarities, it's surprising that there aren't any Mario cameos. And no, there aren't actually any Mario cameos. Okay, so, given that this is a James Bond game from the late 90s, published by Nintendo in the wake of the unprecedented success of Goldeneye on the Nintendo 64 the previous year, you'd figure that the game would try to hew as close to Goldeneye, or at least then current James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, as possible, right? Yeah, you'd think that. You'd be wrong, though. For some inexplicable reason, the majority of the game is modeled after the Roger Moore version of Bond and the 007 movies that he starred in. Keep in mind that the last Moore-starring Bond film was released 13 years prior to the game's release. 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies had just come out the year prior, so it's not like Brosnan was just a one-and-done deal. George Lazenby. The choice to go with Moore's more cartoonish style over Brosnan's more grounded version of the character, remember, Die Another Day hadn't come out yet, is puzzling. Nintendo Power even warned readers that they would be disappointed if they went in looking for a similar experience to GoldenEye on the N64, as though that were even possible on the original Game Boy. Despite this, James Bond for the Game Boy may just be more faithful to the franchise overall than GoldenEye on the N64. The developers clearly went all in on the Roger Moore era. First, the image of Bond on the title screen bears more of a resemblance to publicity photos of Moore's Bond than to Brosnan's. Then there's the overall plot, which mirrors that of 1983's Octopussy in broad strokes. A rogue Russian general, Gogol here, possibly a confused reference to Gogol in the films, who is a much different character, is preparing to launch a stockpile of nuclear weapons in order to assert his position of dominance on the world stage. He is funding his ambitions using a smuggling operation run by a strong, willful female character, Zhongmei in the game, the eponymous character in Octopussy, who sees the error of her ways and aids Bond in his fight against the General's mad ambitions. You could also argue that the plot also resembles both 1977's The Spy Who Loved Me and 1979's Moonraker, which, let's be real, was just a rehash of The Spy Who Loved Me, right down to Jaws, who we'll come back to soon. In both of those movies, the villain wanted to cause nuclear war in order to establish their own order as the dominant one. And if there's still any doubt about the game being inspired by the Roger Moore movies specifically, the developers wiped that doubt away by using an 8-bit chiptune version of Duran Duran's A View to a Kill during the game's ending. This structure is bolstered by nods to other Roger Moore Bond movies, most notably 1974's The Man with the Golden Gun. For example, Zhong Mei's martial arts school in the China section at the beginning of the game references a similar scene in The Man with the Golden Gun. The Man with the Golden Gun is also referenced in the Marrakesh section of the game, where Bond navigates the city's black market, which the game hilariously depicts as an actual market that people go to. In the catacombs just past the black market, the Man with the Golden Gun comes up again in the way Bond obtains the diamond used to buy the tranquilizer dart used to obtain the key to Oddjob's hotel room. See? Link's Awakening style trading quest. Wait, Oddjob? As in 1964 Goldfinger Oddjob? As in the Goldeneye multiplayer character that even the Rare devs admit is cheating Oddjob? Yeah. I mean, they do get aspects of him right. Better than Goldeneye at any rate. For one thing, the game makes him much more imposing than Goldeneye. The reason Oddjob was considered cheating in Goldeneye is that he was short. Short enough that it was difficult to aim at him using the single analog stick N64 controller. This hints at an uncomfortable bias on the part of the developers. See, Toru Tanaka, the man who played Oddjob in Goldfinger, was 5'11". The only reason Tanaka seemed short in Goldfinger was because Sean Connery was 6'2". In other words, it wasn't that Tanaka was short, it was that Connery was tall, and even then, only by a couple of inches. The fact that Rare made Oddjob so short in Goldeneye plays into the obviously incorrect racial stereotype about Asians being short. Which makes playing as him in multiplayer even worse now, doesn't it? Okay, so the Game Boy game gets Oddjob's physical stature correct. That's cool. There are other aspects of his depiction here which are, let's be generous and call them questionable. For one thing, Oddjob is, astoundingly chatty at various points in the game, isn't he? Why is his chattiness astounding? Because Oddjob is supposed to be mute. In Goldfinger, both the book and the movie, it's established that Oddjob has a disability which precludes him from being able to speak. It's okay to have a villainous character act as an exposition dump for the plot, but the developers could have used anyone for that role. It feels like they chose Oddjob for that odd job solely because he is one of the most recognizable James Bond villains in the entire franchise, erasing his disability in the process. And no, I am not apologizing for that terrible wordplay. Also, I'm not sure what's going on when the player actually fights Oddjob. He's throwing at hatted Bond, but it's multiple hats? While his sprite still clearly has the hat on his head? How? You know what? It's fine. It's fine. At least it's better than whatever's going on here with the James Bond Jr. incarnation of the character. Here's the thing with all of these nods to the Bond movie franchise, though. They don't take place in cutscenes. This video game version of Bond, unlike almost every other Bond game before or after, tasks the player with more than just shooting enemies. Sure, the player shoots enemies. A lot of enemies. Or punches them, or machetes them, or you get the idea. But the player also fulfills the staples of the Moore Bond formula, specifically through gameplay. For example, the player must be successful enough at the regular casino tables to earn access to the High Rollers room and attract the attention of the henchmen who frequents it, the walking stereotype that is Mr. Fez, so that Bond can use the tranquilizer dart mentioned to knock Fez out for the key to Oddjob's room. Plot points and story beats, which are just covered in cutscenes in other Bond games, even recent ones like 2010's 007 Bloodstone, are actual playable portions of the game here. On that note, going back to the Roger Moore Bond movies, more specifically The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker, which again, one's just a remake of the other, Jaws also makes an appearance here as well. Unlike with Oddjob, here the game mostly gets it right. Jaws is large and imposing, he doesn't speak, and the player can defeat him in almost the exact same way Bond did in The Spy Who Loved Me. The only thing the developers changed is that Jaws' bites cause considerably less damage than they did in the movies. Which is not a bad thing because one-hit kills against the video game boss are generally not okay. And hey, again, at least making him weaker still doesn't make him as goofy as he is in James Bond Jr. We're not even going to touch the weird monstrous Orientalism going on with the James Bond Jr. version of Dr. No. Actually, you know what? No. Let's talk about that Orientalism for a moment, because it's a problem in the game as well. Let's go back to the Marrakesh portion of the game. Why is the entire city swarming with flies? Why is the black market infested with rats? Did the developers think that the city was just that dirty? What is going on here? Just as this section of the game evokes the man with the golden gun, as mentioned earlier, it also references the racism in the man with the golden gun. It's kind of surprising that racist redneck caricature, comic relief character, J.W. Pepper doesn't make an appearance in the game, since he would definitely fit right in. By that token, why does the China level have to be the martial arts level? I mean, sure, the way the game structures the combat here is kinda cool, forcing the player to be patient, blocking attacks, and waiting for an opening before striking. It's more nuanced than the typical combat in games of this type. Why then is it never used in the same way again in the game? Wait, sorry, I take that back. The same combat mechanics appear in Tibet, where the player fights room after room of sumo wrestlers? Why? Tibet isn't exactly known for its vibrant sumo scene, considering sumo is a Japanese sport. So why are there sumo wrestlers here? Yeah, I know why. Racial stereotyping and generalizations. Still. Also, the game's version of Russia is, awkward. When Bond goes to Russia at the end of the game, it's just a labyrinth of corroded nuclear waste vats. Sure, Bond is there to stop the launch of nuclear missiles, but that's not why Russia is being shown like this. It's kind of clear that this is cartoon shorthand for the whole Chernobyl thing, and there are a few issues with that. First, Chernobyl isn't Russian, it's Ukrainian. It's part of Ukraine. Second, the Chernobyl disaster happened in 1986. By 1998, the radiation levels at Chernobyl were down to safely habitable levels. Using the Chernobyl disaster as shorthand for Russia doesn't make sense if you know anything about it. It just seems uncomfortably crass and disrespectful to an actual disaster that happened in real life. This is video games though, and why would I expect differently? And yet, despite these problems, the game also makes some interesting critiques of the colonialist nature of James Bond as a character. Remember, Bond is a nationalist agent. Sure, saving the world is great, but Bond's driving motivation is usually to protect British interests around the globe. Sometimes that means he makes things worse rather than better. Such is the case with the Kurdistan sections in the game. When Bond first goes there after the China mission, he kills Iqbal, the dictator controlling the region. Okay, great. No more dictator is a good thing, right? Not exactly. The player returns to Kurdistan after defeating Oddjob to discover that all of the characters they interacted with the first time around have been slaughtered wholesale. How did this happen? It turns out that Iqbal, in addition to being a dictator, kept the region from descending into chaos. Without him to hold everything together, Golgov's associates, Saddam and Qatar, really with those names, started causing untold death and destruction with widespread bombings. All of which was Bond's fault, and therefore, the players. Talking to the few survivors during the return trip, they all curse him for the misery he caused without a second thought for the consequences. It's surprisingly heavy stuff for a lightweight Game Boy game where the main villain hops into a mech suit to fight Bond. An easily destroyed mech suit. Oh, speaking of the end of the game, a quick sidebar. So, aside from the title screen, all of the graphics in the game are cartoonish, almost crudely so. Bond just looks like guy in a suit. All of the other figures are drawn in the broadest strokes possible, and the environments pretty much follow suit. Which is why it's so jarring that, if you get the good ending for the game, part of that ending is a highly detailed image of Zhong Mei, which just happens to look uncannily like Jennifer Garner from Significant Others. I really don't know what to do with this. It is really disconcerting in context. James Bond 007 for the Game Boy is a mishmash of the Roger Moore James Bond movies in an era where those movies are outdated, with an, at that point, 5-year-old Nintendo game. It does a good job of actually having the player participate in more aspects of Bond's lifestyle than arguably any other James Bond game to date, complete with the problems inherent in that lifestyle. The cartoonish shorthand used throughout the game can make it awkward, but it's not a long game, and if you're a fan of James Bond, it does enough right to make for a good weekend rental.
Commando Elite, let the first shot be fired!